Chapter 5: The Promise of a Paradise Within. One who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. Bhagavad Gita 14:26. As we near the conclusion of our exploration, it's a deep joy to share how my father's insights, illuminated by the timeless wisdom of the Gita, can enrich our understanding of Paradise Lost. In our preceding chapters, we delved into the essence of God's absolute authority in Chapter 1, discerning how Satan's consuming pride and corrosive envy twisted him into the embodiment of demonic nature in Chapter 2. We then broadened our perspective to examine the material universe itself in Chapter 3, interpreting Milton's magnificent paradise not as an ultimate eternal dwelling but rather as a beautiful yet inherently temporary inverted reflection of superior spiritual reality, a transient realm perpetually vulnerable to the forces of attachment and loss. In Chapter 4, we dissected the temptation and tragic fall of Adam and Eve, recognizing it as a universal lesson in the power of unregulated desire and the illusion of independent enjoyment, seen today in the grip of consumerism or digital addictions. Now, as the epic narrative unfolds towards its conclusion, we arrive at the critical juncture of consequences, the fall of man, and the redemptive paths that follow. This chapter will illuminate how Milton's depiction of divine justice, the inevitable experience of suffering, and the promise of a paradise within thee, happier far resonates powerfully with the Gita's teachings on spiritual law, liberation, and the supreme path of devotional service. We will focus on how these concepts offer not just a summary but an insightful analysis, drawing connections between Milton's epic and the profound philosophical framework of ancient wisdom, a framework that provides hope in an era of global uncertainties like pandemics or inequality. Divine justice and mercy. The immediate aftermath of Adam and Eve's transgression is a somber depiction of loss and the commencement of suffering. Their expulsion from Eden marks the beginning of a harsh new reality, characterized by toil, pain, and mortality. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. This is not arbitrary punishment by a vengeful God, but the unfolding of a universal law of action and reaction. Milton, in his endeavor to assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men, implicitly aligns with the understanding that consequences of each action are an intrinsic part of the cosmic design, intended to guide the conditioned soul towards ultimate realization, like restorative justice systems today that aim for rehabilitation over mere retribution. Consequences of actions. In Milton's narrative, Adam and Eve's suffering, their loss of innocence, the shame, the arduous labor, the pain of childbirth, and the inevitability of death, are direct results of their disobedience. High winds worse within began to rise, high passions, anger, hate. This mirrors the universal principle where every action, whether virtuous or sinful, generates a corresponding reaction that must be experienced. The Gita clearly explains that living entities in the material world are bound by their actions. The temporary body one obtains is the cause of varieties of activities and their resultant reactions. Living in this conditional atmosphere, one suffers the results of the activities of the body by identifying with the body. This ignorance, accumulated from time immemorial, is the root cause of bodily suffering and distress. My father often spoke of how this suffering, though painful, is not inherently evil or punitive in a final sense during one of our reflective evenings. Son, he said, gazing at the stars, think of suffering like a tough teacher. It corrects, not crushes. In today's world where people chase quick fixes through therapy or apps, the Gita reminds us it's a corrective mechanism designed by divine mercy. The material world, with all its inherent miseries, is ultimately a chance for conditioned souls to go back to the spiritual realm, back to home. The experiences of happiness and distress, loss and gain, are all temporary appearances that one must learn to tolerate while executing one's duties. This understanding transforms suffering from a senseless ordeal into a profound educational opportunity, prompting the soul to seek a higher eternal reality beyond the temporary material realm, like adversity building resilience in athletes or leaders. The complexities of action. The Gita goes beyond a simple understanding of good and bad actions, delving into sophisticated distinctions between different types of action. Even the intelligent are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction. Now I shall explain to you what action is. knowing which you shall be liberated from all sins. This verse highlights the profound complexity of actions in the material world and the necessity of receiving knowledge from an authorized source to navigate them properly, like ethical dilemmas in AI or business requiring expert guidance. Prescribed action. These are actions performed according to spiritual principles. They are meant for purification and for maintaining social and cosmic order. The Vedic injunctions prescribe rituals and practices that, when properly performed, can elevate one to higher states of consciousness, leading to material prosperity and a higher standard of life. However, even these pious actions are ultimately binding if performed with attachment to their fruitive results. The true purpose of studying spiritual texts and performing prescribed duties is to understand the divine as the primeval cause of everything and one's eternal relationship with the Supreme. Without this understanding, even pious action can keep one entangled in the cycle of birth and death, like volunteering for recognition rather than service. Forbidden action. These are unauthorized actions, those performed against the principles of spiritual injunctions. Such action leads to further entanglement, suffering, and degradation. Satan's entire scheme to corrupt humanity, tempting Eve with falsehood and guile, is a prime example of forbidden action. Actions performed in complete defiance of God's clear command. Such actions are neither good for the performer nor for others, often leading to present misery and potentially to degraded conditions in the future, like illegal shortcuts in business causing long-term harm. Action without reaction. This is the ultimate goal. This refers to actions performed in spiritual consciousness without attachment to their results for the satisfaction of the divine. Such actions do not generate binding reactions, thereby liberating one from the cycle of birth and death. My father would often use the analogy of a cashier. The cashier may count millions of dollars for his employer, but he does not claim a cent for himself. Similarly, one has to realize that nothing in the world belongs to any individual person but that everything belongs to the Supreme. That is the real purport of unto me. When one acts with this consciousness, understanding that they are not the proprietor of anything, they become free from feverish mentality or lethargy. They are an example for modern activists who act selflessly for causes. Bewilderment and the need for guidance. The Gita emphasizes that even the intelligent are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction. This is why receiving knowledge from an authorized source is crucial. Path to spiritual consciousness must be received through disciplic succession, beginning with the Supreme. Without following this chain of instruction, even the most intelligent individuals can be bewildered regarding the standard actions of spiritual consciousness, like experts confused by ethical eye without foundational principles. This also explains the danger of unscrupulous commentators. Such individuals, driven by personal ambition or a desire to distort truth, offer interpretations that are useless because they distort the true message. Understanding spiritual texts from an impersonal perspective will commit a great blunder, leading the misguided student to be bewildered on the path of spiritual guidance and unable to go back to the spiritual realm. Therefore, to overcome the bewildering complexities of action, one must learn from the divine directly or from a pure devotee, never from a non-devotee upstart puffed up with academic education, like seeking mentors over influencers. Divine guidance and the path to redemption. Despite the tragic fall, Milton's narrative, like the Gita, ultimately points towards a path of redemption and divine mercy. God's plan is not simply to punish, but to guide the erring soul back to Him, like counseling after a mistake. Michael's instruction to Adam. In Paradise Lost, after the fall, the Archangel Michael is sent to Adam not merely to pronounce judgment, but to instruct him, to impart knowledge of future events, and to teach him how to live in a fallen world. Add virtue, patience, temperance. Add love by name to come called charity. Michael's instruction to Adam includes lessons on developing true patience and rising above the bitter change of fierce extremes, the dualities of prosperous or adverse. This prophetic guidance is a crucial turning point, offering hope and a blueprint for navigating life outside of Eden, like life coaching post-trauma. This echoes the Gita's teaching on the necessity of tolerating non-permanent appearances and disappearances of happiness and distress. Text advises to rise above these modes. Be transcendental to all of them. Be free from all dualities and from all anxieties for gain and safety, and be established in the self. This state of equilibrium, of even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, is a hallmark of transcendental knowledge. It is a realization that all material conditions, whether perceived as good or bad, are temporary and ultimately irrelevant to the eternal spiritual existence of the soul, like Stoicism in psychology. Penance and submission. Following Michael's instructions, Adam and Eve eventually reach a state of genuine repentance. Milton describes them standing in lowliest plight repentant, with Eve expressing meek submission. This act of humble submission and sincere repentance is the initial step towards spiritual reconciliation and divine grace. Signifies a turning away from the false ego and an acknowledgement of God's supreme authority, like apologies in therapy healing rifts. The Gita presents surrender to God as the most confidential part of knowledge. The ultimate instruction is to abandon all varieties of dharma and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. This surrender is not a sign of weakness but of ultimate intelligence and a recognition of one's eternal position as a subordinate part of the divine. It is through this act of sincere surrender that one can become free from all sinful reactions and begin the journey back to the spiritual realm. Qualities such as humility and pridelessness are described as components of true knowledge, prerequisites for advancing on the spiritual path. To think oneself God is the most puffed-up delusion arising from ignorance which needs to be overcome by humility, like ego checks in leadership training. God's benevolent plan. The expulsion from Eden, though seemingly a harsh judgment, is part of God's overarching benevolent plan. The material world, with all its inherent difficulties, is presented in the Vedic tradition as a chance for conditioned souls to go back to the spiritual realm, back to home. It is not merely a prison but a school, an opportunity for purification and spiritual awakening, like boot camps building character. The divine is revealed as the well-wisher of all living entities. Divine arrangements, even those that bring suffering, are ultimately for the benefit of the conditioned soul, guiding them towards their eternal liberation. The Supreme is not partial towards anyone. Everything depends on one's practical performance of duties in an effort to control the senses and conquer the influence of desire and anger. Thus, the suffering and challenges in the material world are opportunities for self-correction and spiritual growth, provided by a compassionate divine who desires the ultimate welfare of all souls, like tough love from parents. The Supreme Path. Culmination of the Gita's teachings and the ultimate path to genuine redemption and liberation is pure devotional service. This is the highest spiritual science deemed most confidential by the divine, a practice accessible in the digital age through apps or communities. The Gita consistently emphasizes that the knowledge being imparted is not ordinary but deeply confidential. In the 9th chapter it states, "This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting and it is joyfully performed." Later, in the 18th chapter, "Thus I have explained to you the most confidential of all knowledge. Deliberate on this fully and then do what you wish to do." This most confidential part of this knowledge is the instruction to just surrender unto the Supreme. This profound wisdom, however, is not for everyone. It is specifically meant for the non-envious. The Gita's teachings should not be spoken to those who are envious of the divine. It is for those who are actually very dear to the Supreme, a pure devotee. This exclusivity unders the sacredness and transformative power of this knowledge, which can only be properly received by a humble and devoted heart, free from the demonic quality of envy, like exclusive mentorships for the committed. Devotional service as direct liberation. The Gita clearly states that work in devotional service is better than dry mental speculation. It is easier, and being transcendental in nature, it frees one from reaction. Unlike philosophical speculation, which can be perplexing, devotional service directly elevates the soul. The guiding principle states, "One who is engaged in my pure devotional service, free from the contaminations of previous activities and from mental speculation, who is friendly to every living entity, certainly comes to me. This affirms that pure devotional service is the direct method for liberation. Spiritual consciousness, the full realization of the divine's supreme position, is considered the highest perfection of self-realization and the highest form of all spiritual practice. One who is in full spiritual realization has understood all aspects of the absolute truth. By taking directly to spiritual consciousness, one automatically knows about the impersonal and localized aspects of the absolute truth in full without needing to go through separate arduous processes. It provides full and scientific knowledge of the divine, who is ultimate knowledge beyond any doubts, like integrated learning and education. Engaging in spiritual consciousness. Practical application of devotional service involves engaging all one's faculties in divine service. The Gita outlines 9 forms of devotional service, of which hearing about the divine is the first and most important. This means hearing from the Supreme directly or from a pure devotee. Chanting holy names. For the current age, where other rigorous spiritual practices are difficult to perform, the best means of spiritual realization is chanting the holy name. This process is extremely effective in purging the mind of all misgivings and cleaning the accumulated dust of past karma, accessible via apps like Insight Timer for guided chants. Association with devotees. To effectively cut down the banyan tree of material existence, one must associate with devotees, those who are in spiritual consciousness. This association is vital for learning how to discharge devotional service and for being delivered from delusion. Hearing spiritual texts in the association of devotees leads to one's life being glorified beyond all penances, sacrifices, charities, speculations, etc., like joining support groups or online forums. Working for the divine. Even if one cannot directly practice the regulative principles of devotional service, one can still attain spiritual perfection by working for the Supreme. This involves being sympathetic to the propagation of spiritual consciousness, helping with resources like land, capital, organization, and labor. Whether it's building temples or helping with publications, any activities, when performed for divine satisfaction instead of personal sense gratification, become a spiritual activity and help one rise to a higher state of love for God, like CSR in companies with ethical intent. Faith. Firm faith is the bedrock of spiritual advancement. One who executes his duties according to my injunctions and who follows this teaching faithfully, without envy, becomes free from the bondage of fruitive actions. Even if one is initially unable to execute such orders, but has firm faith without envying the divine, they become liberated from the bondage of the law of karma, like trusting a process in fitness journeys. True renunciation and the renounced order. Following the fall, Adam and Eve are forced into a life of renunciation, leaving their idyllic paradise behind. This external renunciation, imposed by divine decree, forces them to confront the impermanence of material attachments, like downsizing in midlife crises. Definitions and distinctions. The Gita clarifies the distinctions between different types of renunciation. Renounced order of life traditionally refers to the complete renunciation of all kinds of fruitive activities. Signifies giving up worldly engagements entirely, like monastic life. Renunciation of fruits refers to renunciation of the fruits of action. This is more about internal detachment from results, even while performing duties, like working without obsession over promotions. Text further clarifies specific actions that might be contentious, explaining that understanding what constitutes true renunciation or proper action often requires divine clarity and cannot be determined by personal opinion or incomplete knowledge. However, it recommends that acts of sacrifice, charity, and penance should never be abandoned. The importance of purification. The Gita explicitly warns against an artificial or premature renunciation. Without being fully in spiritual consciousness, no one should suddenly give up his prescribed duties and become a so-called spiritual practitioner artificially. Such an abrupt adoption of renunciation without genuine internal purification and spiritual consciousness can lead to simply a disturbance to the social order, like pseudo-spiritual influencers causing confusion. Traditional spiritual society is divided into 4 orders of life: student life, householder life, retired life, and renounced life. These are all meant to help people become perfect spiritual practitioners or transcendentalists. The ideal is gradual progression through self-control, study, and austerity. Students are meant to live a life of celibacy and engage in the study of spiritual literature, controlling their minds by abstaining from sense gratification. Austerity is essential for liberation. Without austerity, no human being can get liberation. This systematic progression allows for a gradual cleansing of the heart and mind, preparing one for genuine renunciation, like career stages building expertise. Performing prescribed duties. Instead of artificial renunciation, the Gita emphasizes performing one's prescribed duties with detachment. It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though they may be faulty, than another's duties. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. This principle highlights the importance of working according to one's innate nature and psychophysical condition, rather than imitating others, like staying in one's lane in professional growth. A person in spiritual consciousness performs their duties without attachment to results, for the satisfaction of the divine. This detached action transforms ordinary work into liberated action, freeing one from binding consequences. Even if one initially struggles to fully execute divine injunctions, firm faith and sincere effort without consideration of defeat and hopelessness will ensure progress towards pure spiritual consciousness and liberation from the bondage of the law of karma, incremental like habit-building apps. The power of transcendental knowledge. The fall plunged Adam and Eve into a state of ignorance and illusion, obscuring their pure consciousness. The ultimate antidote to this spiritual darkness, as emphasized throughout the Gita, is transcendental knowledge. This knowledge not only reveals the true nature of reality but also empowers the soul to transcend material entanglement, like education empowering marginalized communities. Knowledge is fire. My father would always powerfully quote, "As a blazing fire turns firewood to ashes, so does the fire of knowledge burn to ashes all reactions to material activities." This metaphor vividly illustrates the transformative power of spiritual knowledge. It is not mere intellectual understanding but realized knowledge, a profound insight that eradicates the binding consequences that keep the soul tethered to material suffering. This knowledge enables one to become liberated from all sins. This transcendental knowledge is peaceful, and when one attains it, one is no longer bewildered by the influence of ignorance. It involves the re-establishment of the eternal relationship between the worshipper and the worshipable, and the consequent understanding of the difference between the individual soul and the Supreme. It is by this knowledge that illusion is now dispelled. Distinction between body, soul, and supersoul. The foundation of transcendental knowledge lies in understanding the fundamental distinctions between matter and spirit. The text clarifies, "You should understand that I am also the knower in all bodies, and to understand this body and its owner is called knowledge. That is my opinion." This verse introduces three key topics of study. The body, the field of activities comprising the five great elements: false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested state of the modes, 11 senses, 5 sense objects, desire, hatred, happiness, distress, life symptoms, and convictions. The individual soul, the owner of the body. The living entity, though superior to matter, is fallible and becomes entangled by identifying with the body. The supersoul, the divine's plenary expansion, present in every field of activities in every body, as the superknower. The supersoul is infallible and uncontaminated by the modes of nature. Understanding these three categories, the divine, the living entity, and matter, constitutes true knowledge. The text emphasizes that those who claim the individual soul and the supersoul are one and the same, contradict the Supreme. This knowledge, when understood through a genuine spiritual master, becomes the stepping stone for further spiritual realization, like foundational courses in university. Spiritual vision. Through the development of this transcendental knowledge, one transcends the illusion of identifying with the material body, which is rooted in false ego. This leads to the spiritual conception, the realization that one is not the material body but is actually a spiritual soul. It is a realization of unity in diversity, understanding that while living entities are distinct, everything ultimately emanates from and rests upon the divine. When one ceases to see identities based on external material bodies and instead perceives the singular spirit soul everywhere, this spiritual conception deepens, fostering humility and an understanding of one's subordination to the Supreme. This clear spiritual vision helps one realize that the divine is the origin of everything in both the material and spiritual worlds. Such a realized soul becomes firmly fixed in the devotional service of the Supreme, and can never be deviated by any amount of nonsensical commentaries or by fools, immune like vaccinated minds against misinformation. Liberation and spiritual consciousness. Milton's epic concludes with Michael's poignant prophecy to Adam, offering the promise of a paradise within thee, happier far. This is the ultimate spiritual resolution, aligning perfectly with the Gita's vision of liberation and the supreme fulfillment found in spiritual consciousness, a concept echoed in modern mindfulness practices. The internal paradise. Michael's promise to Adam that with faith, virtue, patience, temperance, add love by name to come called charity, the soul of all the rest, then wilt thou not be loath to leave this paradise, but shalt possess a paradise within thee, happier far, beautifully encapsulates the concept of an internal, spiritual sanctuary that transcends all external material conditions. This resonates deeply with the Gita's teaching that true peace and happiness are found within, independent of material circumstances. This internal paradise is achieved by rising above the material modes of nature and being transcendental to all of them. It means being free from all dualities and from all anxieties for gain and safety. The Gita describes happiness in the mode of goodness as that which in the beginning may be just like poison but at the end is just like nectar and which awakens one to self-realization. This signifies that initially the practice of spiritual disciplines might seem difficult or austere, but the ultimate result is profound and eternal satisfaction. By constant practice, one can gradually come to the end of all distress and experience genuine, lasting joy, like initial gym pains leading to fitness. Path to supreme perfection. The goal of spiritual consciousness is to attain the supreme perfectional stage by acting in a specific, divinely guided way. This perfection involves understanding one's true identity as an eternal servitor of the divine. Qualities that enable one to attain this state are outlined in the Gita. A purified intelligence, controlling the mind with determination, giving up the objects of sense gratification and abandoning desire and hatred, living in solitary places, eating sparingly and controlling one's speech, body, and mind, constantly engaged in meditation and embracing true detachment, being free from false ego, strength, pride, lust, anger, and acceptance of material things, coming free from proprietorship and peaceful. One who develops these qualities becomes competent for self-realization and attains the perfection of life. This state of pure existence is the ultimate antidote to the delusion of desire that caused the fall, like holistic wellness programs integrating mind, body, spirit. Ultimate destination. The ultimate goal of this spiritual journey, the true paradise regained, is to return back home, back to the spiritual realm. For the spiritually conscious person, there is no fear of returning to the material world, regardless of the circumstances of their death. Such a person is promoted to the supreme abode. This is the eternal spiritual sky, the divine's supreme abode, from which, having once gone, one never returns.